The coffee was perfect that morning. Dorothy Harlan had been making the same pot of coffee for 41 years. 2 scoops of Folgers, a pinch of cinnamon, water filled exactly to the 8-cup line. And it had never once let her down. She carried her mug to the front porch, lowered herself into the wicker chair that Frank had bought at a yard sale in 1998, and watched Burlington, Vermont wake up slowly on a cool September Saturday. The maple tree at the edge of the yard had already started to turn, just the tips of the upper branches, a faint blush of orange that would deepen over the next few weeks into something almost unbearably beautiful. Frank used to say that Vermont autumns were God showing off. Dorothy had always agreed. She was 71 years old. She had lived at 412 Elmwood Drive for 32 years. She had raised her son Nathan in this house, buried her husband's memory in its walls, paid off the last of the mortgage with a check she wrote with shaking hands on a Tuesday morning in April 2009, alone, because Frank had been gone for 4 years by then, and there was no one to celebrate with except Ruth Atwood, who had brought a bottle of sparkling cider and a grocery store cake that said congratulations in pink frosting. The deed to this house, the original document, crisp and official, stored in a fireproof lockbox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, read, Dorothy Jean Harlan, sole owner, not Frank and Dorothy, not Nathan, just her. She had thought about changing that. Last year, after Nathan's 38th birthday, she had made an appointment with her attorney, James Holloway, to discuss transferring the property. James had listened carefully, asked several questions she hadn't expected, and then leaned back in his chair and said, Dorothy, there's no rush. Let's revisit this in 6 months. Make sure you're certain. She had left his office that afternoon without signing a single thing. Standing now on her porch, watching a pair of cardinals argue over the bird feeder Frank had built from a kit in 1995, she was quietly, privately grateful that she had listened to James. Her life was small by some people's standards, and she loved every inch of it. Mondays and Wednesdays she went to the watercolor class at the Fletcher Free Library. She was no great artist, but she enjoyed the smell of the paint and the company of the other women who came. Tuesdays and Thursdays she did yoga with Ruth Atwood, who had been her closest friend since their sons played Little League together, and who remained, at 73, the sharpest person Dorothy knew. Fridays she volunteered in the children's reading room at the library, where she read picture books aloud to whoever showed up and felt, every single time, that she was doing something genuinely useful. Saturdays she walked to the farmer's market on Church Street, bought whatever looked good, and came home to cook something unhurried and complicated that she would eat for 3 days. Sundays she called her sister Carol in Portland, Oregon, and they talked for an hour about everything and nothing. It was a good life, a quiet life, a life that belonged entirely to her. And then Nathan called. Mom. His voice had that particular texture it got when he was nervous, slightly too casual, slightly too cheerful. So, I have some news. She had known before he said another word. Her name is Brittany Sutton, he said. We work in the same department. Well, worked. She's transferring to the marketing division. We've been seeing each other for about 4 months. Mom, I really think this is it. Dorothy sat down on the edge of the kitchen chair and pressed the phone closer to her ear. Tell me about her. He did. For 20 minutes he told her about Brittany Sutton, how she was 34, how she was originally from Albany, how she had this laugh that you could hear from across a restaurant, how she liked hiking and hated scary movies and made the best lemon pasta Nathan had ever eaten. Dorothy listened to every word, and underneath all of it, underneath the statistics and the anecdotes, she heard the thing that mattered most. Her son was happy. Her son, who had dated carefully and briefly and without much visible enthusiasm for 2 decades, who had lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Winooski for 6 years, who called his mother every Sunday, not just out of obligation, but because, she believed, he genuinely enjoyed talking to her. Her son had found someone. I'd like to meet her, Dorothy said. Yeah? The relief in his voice was almost comical. Yeah, okay. Good, I'll set something up. She had not yet met Brittany Sutton, but she was already rooting for her. They were married in June, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Stowe. 40 guests. White tent, wildflowers, late afternoon light that made everything look painted. Dorothy wore the navy dress she'd bought for Carol's daughter's graduation and cried 3 times. Once when Nathan walked out and saw Brittany at the end of the aisle, once during the vows, and once privately in the ladies' room when no one was watching, because Frank should have been there and wasn't. Brittany Sutton, now Brittany Sutton Harlan, was tall and blonde and polished in a way that reminded Dorothy of a showroom. Everything in place, everything gleaming, everything chosen carefully. She shook Dorothy's hand at the rehearsal dinner with a firm grip and a wide smile and said, "Nathan talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." Dorothy had smiled back and said all the right things, but she had noticed, filed quietly away, the way you file things you're not sure what to do with yet, that Brittany's eyes, even while smiling, were always moving, taking inventory, assessing. She had told herself she was being uncharitable. Nervous mothers-in-law saw threats everywhere. She had tried to believe that. 2 months before the wedding, Nathan had called again. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know you can absolutely say no." She had known before he said another word. Again. Their apartment lease was ending. The rent on the new place they'd found was $2,400 a month, which was, Nathan used the word aggressive, which made Dorothy smile despite herself. They needed a few months to save up. The wedding was already stretching their budget. Would it be possible, maybe, just temporarily? "Nathan, yeah, this house has 3 bedrooms and it's just me. Come home." The silence on his end was warm with gratitude. "You sure?" "I'm sure. This is your home, too." She had meant every word. She would mean them for a long time, even after everything that followed. What she did not say, what she said to no one, not even Ruth, was that the house was still legally hers, that she had not signed any transfer documents, that for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate at the time, some quiet, careful part of her had decided to wait just a little longer. She did not know then that that quiet, careful part of her was saving her life. Brittany arrived on a Sunday afternoon with 4 large suitcases and 11 cardboard boxes, and she moved through Dorothy's house like someone mentally measuring for new furniture. "This space is incredible," she said, standing in the center of the living room and turning slowly, taking it all in. "It has so much potential." Dorothy was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching. She registered the word, potential, the way you register a small, unfamiliar sound in the night. Not alarming, just noted. "Thank you," she said. "Frank and I always loved this room." Brittany smiled. "Of course. Nathan's told me so much about his dad." She turned back to the window. "The light in here is wonderful." That first week was manageable. They were still in the mode of guests trying to make good impressions. Brittany cooked dinner twice, and it was genuinely delicious. Nathan helped with yard work without being asked. They said good morning and good night and asked about Dorothy's day with what seemed like real interest. Dorothy exhaled. She'd been holding her breath without knowing it. By the second week, she started breathing again. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started small, the way these things always do. The framed photograph of Frank that had hung in the entryway for 26 years. Frank at their cabin in the Adirondacks, laughing at something off camera, squinting into the summer sun, was gone one Tuesday morning. In its place hung a large round mirror with a gold frame that Brittany had apparently ordered online. Dorothy stood in the entryway for a moment, looking at her own reflection in the spot where her husband used to be. She found the photograph leaning against the baseboard behind the coat rack, face in. She carried it upstairs and put it on her dresser where she could see it from her pillow. She didn't say anything. She told herself that Brittany lived here now, too, that it was reasonable for a young woman to want to put her own mark on a space, that there was such a thing as picking your battles, and this was not a hill worth anything. The following week, her plant table, a small wooden stand she'd had for 15 years, currently holding 3 African violets and a trailing pothos that was the pride of her gardening efforts, disappeared from the corner of the living room. She found it in the garage, plants still on it, wedged between the lawnmower and a box of Christmas decorations. The armchair she read in every afternoon, the one with the good lamp angled just right, the one where she had spent thousands of hours with thousands of books, was pushed into the corner behind a large fiddle-leaf fig that Brittany had brought home from a home goods store, effectively hiding it. Dorothy moved her reading chair back. The next day, it was in the corner again. She didn't say anything. She brought her plants in from the garage and put them on the kitchen windowsill instead. She started reading in her bedroom. She told herself this was normal. Adjustment. Compromise. The natural friction of multiple people sharing a space. She was wrong, but she didn't know that yet. And then Peggy Sutton arrived. Just for a few days, Brittany said, not quite meeting Dorothy's eyes. Mom's between things right now. She just needs a little time to sort herself out. Peggy Sutton drove up from Albany in a silver Buick with 2 large suitcases and a smile that Dorothy recognized immediately, not because she'd seen it on Peggy before, but because she'd seen it in her own mirror once or twice, years ago, when she was about to win an argument she'd been planning for a long time. It was the smile of someone who already knew how things were going to go. "Dorothy," Peggy said, opening her arms as she came up the front walk, as though they were old friends reuniting after years apart. "I've heard so much about you. Brittany says this house is just gorgeous." "It's good to meet you," Dorothy said. "Come in." Peggy came in. She looked at the living room with the same slow, assessing turn her daughter had done on the first day. "Oh, this is lovely. All this space. Britt said it was big, but I didn't imagine—" She stopped herself, smiled again. "You must rattle around in here all by yourself." Dorothy smiled back. "I manage." A few days became a week. A week became 2. 2 weeks dissolved into a month, and Peggy Sutton showed no signs of sorting herself out or going anywhere. She slept until 10 most mornings and occupied the living room sofa with a territorial ease that Dorothy found difficult to describe and impossible to ignore. She used Dorothy's guest bathroom without asking. She used Dorothy's good towels, the cream-colored ones with the embroidered edges that Dorothy kept for actual guests, brought out for Christmas and Thanksgiving, as though they were ordinary. She helped herself to Dorothy's lavender hand lotion from the bathroom shelf. She used the last of the good coffee and replaced it with a cheaper brand without saying anything. Small things. Individually, nothing. Cumulatively, the slow erosion of a boundary. What bothered Dorothy most, though, was not the towels or the coffee or the hours Peggy spent on her sofa. It was the way the 2 women talked to each other in Dorothy's house, Peggy and Brittany, mother and daughter, as though Dorothy were already gone. As though this house were already theirs, and the question of her departure was merely a scheduling matter. She would come downstairs to find them at the kitchen table with graph paper and tape measures, sketching out floor plan changes. She would walk through the living room and catch fragments. The master bath really needs to be completely redone, and if you take out that wall between the dining room and kitchen and the backyard, could be so much more with some actual landscaping. Each time Dorothy entered the room, the conversation shifted. Became general, became about nothing. She noticed. She filed it away. The Tuesday morning was cool and clear, and Ruth picked Dorothy up at 7 sharp for yoga. The class was held in the basement of a church on Willard Street, led by a woman named Patricia, who had been teaching for 30 years and still managed to make downward dog look effortless. Dorothy was not effortless, had never been effortless, and had decided years ago that effortlessness was overrated. She showed up, she breathed. She was grateful that her knees still allowed her to do most of what was asked of them. That morning, Patricia's sister had gone into early labor. By 9 o'clock, class was over, 40 minutes early. Ruth drove Dorothy home. They were still talking about Patricia's sister when Ruth turned onto Elmwood Drive. "Text me when you hear news," Dorothy said, climbing out of the car. "I will. Enjoy your morning, Dot." Dorothy went up the porch steps. She put her key in the lock. She turned it quietly, the way she always did when she came home early. Some old habit from the years when Nathan was a teenager and she hadn't wanted to disturb whatever he was doing. She stepped inside, and she heard their voices from the living room. She recognized Peggy's voice first. That particular tone, self-assured and unhurried. The voice of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say and believes completely in its logic. "I'm telling you, Britt, now is the time. You've been here long enough. You know how she operates. She's stubborn, but she's 71 years old. Stubborn people that age get tired. They don't want conflict. They want peace." Dorothy stood perfectly still in the entryway. Her yoga bag was still on her shoulder. The front door was still open an inch behind her. Brittany's voice came back, lower, slightly uncertain. "But she's Nathan's mother." "Of course she is. And Nathan loves her. But Nathan loves you more. That's why he married you and not her." A short pause. "You make him feel chosen. You make him feel like a man. She makes him feel like a child. He'll always choose you if you do this right. I just don't know how he'll react if... He'll react the way men always react when their wives are calm and reasonable and loving." Peggy's voice was patient, almost kind, the way a chess instructor explains a move to a promising student. "You're not fighting with her. You're never fighting with her. You're just nudging. Every day, a little more. You rearrange her things, you fill her spaces, you make plans that assume she's already gone. You make her feel like a guest in her own home until she decides on her own that it's time to move on. Dorothy's hand tightened on the strap of her yoga bag. And if she doesn't want to? Brittany asked. Move on, I mean. Then you make it very uncomfortable for her to stay, Peggy said simply. Old people don't fight, Britt. They retreat. Give her enough reasons to feel in the way, and she'll find herself a nice little apartment somewhere and be relieved to go. A silence. Mom, the house is hers, though. For now, Peggy said. But Nathan's always known it'll be his someday. She told him so herself. So really, it's just a matter of timing. Why wait for her to decide she's ready when you can help her get there? Dorothy stood in her own entryway, in her own house, on the mat she'd had since 1997, and understood something that had been forming in her for weeks without quite taking shape. This was not friction. This was not adjustment. This was a plan. Deliberate, patient, and already well underway. She turned. She walked back out the front door, pulling it shut so softly behind her that it made no sound at all. She stood on her own porch in the September morning and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she took out her phone and called Ruth Atwood. Ruth, can you come back? Dot? What happened? Did you forget something? Please, come now. Ruth didn't ask another question. I'm turning around. They sat in a booth at a diner on Willard Street, the kind of place with laminated menus and good biscuits and coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs. And Dorothy told Ruth everything, not just what she'd heard that morning, but all of it. The photograph, the plants, the towels, the contractor sketches on the kitchen table, all the small erasures, laid out one after another. Ruth listened without interrupting. When Dorothy finished, Ruth wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked at her steadily. Dot, the deed to your house. What about it? It's still in your name. Yes. Nathan doesn't know that? Officially? He knows I plan to leave it to him. He doesn't know I've never signed anything. We never had that specific conversation. Ruth was quiet for a moment. The diner hummed around them, a table of older men arguing about the Red Sox, a young mother trying to convince a toddler that pancakes were, in fact, delicious. Then you still have everything, Ruth said finally. They have nothing. They're building a whole plan on top of a promise you never put in writing. Dorothy nodded slowly. Here's what you do, Ruth said. You don't say a word. Not to Nathan, not to Brittany, and especially not to that woman. You let them believe they're winning. You let them get comfortable, let them get confident. And in the meantime, you go see James Holloway, and you make sure every piece of paper with your name on it is exactly where it needs to be. And then? And then, when they finally show their hand completely, when they do something so obvious there's no explaining it away, you show them yours. Dorothy looked at her oldest friend across the table. Outside the window, the September light was doing what September light does in Vermont, turning everything gold and slightly melancholy and unutterably beautiful. I'll call James tomorrow, she said. Good. Ruth? How did you know I hadn't signed anything? Ruth smiled, small, certain, fond. Because I know you, Dorothy Harlan. You've been doing your taxes alone since 1989. You don't sign things until you're ready. Dorothy picked up her coffee. No, she said quietly. I don't. She drove home that afternoon with the windows down, the autumn air cold enough to sting, and something she hadn't felt in weeks settling back into her chest. Not anger, not fear, clarity. She pulled into the driveway of 412 Elmwood Drive and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the house. The white clapboard siding, the black shutters, the maple tree Frank had planted the year Nathan was born, now 40 years old and enormous. The rose bushes along the back fence that came back every spring no matter what, as if loyalty were something that grew in the ground. She had worked 30 years as an office administrator at the Vermont Department of Education to pay for this house. She had raised a child in it alone for most of those years, packing lunches and attending school plays and sitting up at night with a sick boy and driving a teenager to Saturday practice at 7 a.m. without complaint. She had held her husband's hand in this house on the last night of his life, and she had woken up the next morning and put one foot in front of the other and kept going. This house was not simply a piece of property. It was the physical proof that she had lived and worked and endured and survived. No one, not Brittany Sutton Harlan, not Peggy Sutton from Albany with her measuring eyes and her careful plans, was going to take it from her. She got out of the car, smoothed her jacket, and went inside. "Good evening," she said pleasantly to Brittany, who was in the kitchen. "How was your afternoon?" And she smiled the smile of someone who knows exactly what's coming. Monday morning came gray and cold, the kind of Vermont morning that smells like wood smoke and wet leaves, and the particular melancholy of things ending. Dorothy was up at 6. She made her coffee, drank the first cup standing at the kitchen window watching the backyard, then went upstairs, opened the fireproof lockbox on the top shelf of her closet, and took out the deed to 412 Elmwood Drive. She sat on the edge of her bed and read it completely. Every line, every clause, the legal description of the property, the recording date, the notary seal in the bottom corner. Dorothy Jean Harlan, sole owner. She put it back in the lockbox, snapped it shut, placed it exactly where it had been. Then she went downstairs, refilled her coffee, and called James Holloway's office at 8:30, the moment they opened. "Good morning, this is Fletcher and Holloway." "Good morning, this is Dorothy Harlan. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Holloway as soon as possible. It's regarding a property matter." "Of course, Mrs. Harlan. He has an opening tomorrow morning at 9. "I'll be there." She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment, listening to the house around her. Somewhere above, she could hear Brittany moving, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the particular creak of the second floorboard from the top of the stairs that had been creaking since 1994. From the guest room at the end of the hall came the slower sounds of Peggy Sutton still sleeping. Dorothy rinsed her cup, dried her hands on the dish towel, and went to her computer to look up Vermont property law. She had not survived 30 years of government administration by waiting for other people to explain things to her. James Holloway's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Cherry Street, downtown Burlington, with tall windows that looked out over the pedestrian marketplace and the lake beyond. The office smelled like old books and good coffee, and the particular quiet of a place where serious things were discussed carefully. Holloway himself was 57, trim, with silver-rimmed glasses and the deliberate manner of a man who had learned that most problems were best approached without urgency. He had handled Dorothy's affairs for 11 years. The refinancing, Frank's estate, the question of the deed transfer that hadn't happened, and he greeted her now with the handshake of someone genuinely glad to see her. "Dorothy, sit down. Tell me everything." She did. She was organized about it. She had written notes on a yellow legal pad the night before after everyone was asleep, dates and incidents arranged chronologically. She went through it all. The photograph, the plants, the contractor sketches, Peggy's arrival and failure to depart. And then, in exact detail, the conversation she had overheard from the entryway on Tuesday morning. Holloway listened without interruption, making occasional notes. When she finished, he set his pen down and looked at her over his glasses. "All right, first things first." He folded his hands on the desk. "You are the sole legal owner of that property. That has not changed, will not change, and cannot change without your signature on a recorded deed of transfer. Nathan's expectation, however reasonable it might feel to him, has no legal weight. A verbal promise is not a deed." "I know that," Dorothy said. "I just needed to hear you say it." "Consider it said." He picked up his pen again. "Now, these women are living in your home at your discretion. You invited them. That invitation can be revoked. If they refuse to leave after proper written notice, we file for eviction. It's a standard unlawful detainer proceeding. With your documentation as clean as it is, it would be straightforward." "How much notice?" 30 days is standard in Vermont for this type of occupancy situation. Dorothy nodded. "And what do I do in the meantime?" Holloway leaned back. "You document everything. Every incident, every comment, every unauthorized change to the property. Dates, times, exact words if you can remember them. Photographs where applicable. If you have a smartphone, the voice memo app is your friend. Vermont is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're participating in or conversations that occur in your presence. What about conversations I overhear? More nuanced, but the recording you described from Tuesday, where you were standing in your own entryway and heard voices carrying from the adjacent room, that exists in a gray area that generally favors the property owner, particularly in a civil matter. He paused. Why do you ask? Because I intend to keep my phone recording whenever I'm in common areas of my own home from now on. Holloway looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. I think that's prudent. There's one more thing, Dorothy said. The conversation I overheard. They mentioned conservatorship. A beat of silence. They used that word specifically? Peggy did. She said that if they could establish I was, her word was irrational, a court might appoint a legal guardian to manage my affairs, and that guardian would likely be Nathan. Holloway's expression remained professionally even, but something behind his eyes sharpened. That is a significant escalation in intent, Dorothy. Conservatorship proceedings are not casual undertakings. They require medical documentation, court hearings, clear evidence of incapacity. But the fact that it's being discussed as a strategy means I need to be ahead of it. Yes, I want you to schedule a full physical with your doctor as soon as possible. Get current blood work, cognitive screening if they'll do it, everything on record. A clean recent medical file is your first line of defense against any attempt to paint you as incapacitated. Dorothy was already writing it down. James, she said without looking up from her notepad, when I'm ready, when I've documented enough and they've shown enough, how quickly can you prepare the formal notices? 48 hours. Good. She capped her pen and put the notepad in her purse. I'll be in touch. She walked out of that office and down 3 flights of stairs and out onto Cherry Street with the autumn wind in her face, and she felt for the first time in weeks like herself. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Dorothy's life. She went about her routine with the serene regularity of a woman who had nothing on her mind. Yoga with Ruth on Tuesdays and Thursdays, watercolor on Mondays and Wednesdays, the farmer's market on Saturday, the children's reading room on Friday, where she read The Very Hungry Caterpillar to a group of 4-year-olds who listened with the absolute, uncritical attention that only very young children and very good dogs are capable of. She was pleasant at dinner. She asked Brittany about her day. She offered Peggy the good section of the Sunday newspaper, and she kept her phone in her cardigan pocket, voice memo app running, every time she came downstairs. What she collected over those 3 weeks. Brittany, on a Wednesday evening, on the phone with someone Dorothy couldn't identify. She keeps saying it's her house, like that's supposed to mean something. Nathan's going to inherit it anyway. It's just a matter of when. Peggy to Brittany over coffee on a Saturday morning when they thought Dorothy was still upstairs. The trick is to never make her feel attacked. You make her feel helped. You make her feel like all your decisions are for her benefit. Old women believe it when you tell them something is for their own good. And then, on a Thursday night, the recording that changed everything. Dorothy had gone to bed at 9:30, which was earlier than usual, and she had not been asleep. She had been lying in the dark with her phone on the nightstand, screen down, recording. The voices from Nathan and Brittany's room filtered through the shared wall with unnerving clarity. The old house had never been well insulated. Brittany's voice first. She's not going to just agree to leave, Marcus. Nathan, I know. So we need to think about what comes next. Your mom is... Nathan, she's getting more resistant, not less. She kicked out the contractors. She started saying my house in a way she wasn't saying it before, like she's reminding us. A long pause, then Nathan. She is reminding us. What? Britt, it is her house. Silence. Then Brittany, her voice lower and more careful. Your mother is 71 years old and she's living alone in a 3-bedroom house that she can't maintain forever. We're trying to help her. Are we? Another silence. Longer this time. My mom talked to a lawyer friend of hers, Brittany said very quietly, about conservatorship, about what it would take to establish that someone isn't capable of managing their own financial affairs. Brittany. Nathan's voice had changed. No, we're not doing that. I'm just saying it's an option. It's not an option. She's my mother. She's completely fine. She's sharper than both of us. Then why won't she cooperate? Because it's her house. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. And we're asking her to sign away everything she has left of my dad and 30 years of her life and act like it's a favor to her. Brittany said nothing. I don't know, Nathan said very quietly. I don't know about any of this anymore. Dorothy lay in the dark, phone recording, and listened to her son say the truest thing he had said in months. And she lay there for a long time after his voice stopped, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy he had been. The one who used to knock on her bedroom door when he had a bad dream, who used to bring her dandelions from the backyard as though they were long-stemmed roses, and the man he was becoming, or failing to become, depending on what he chose next. She did not call Holloway that night, but she opened her phone and typed herself a note. He knows. He's afraid. The question is whether he's more afraid of her or more afraid of himself. Wait, not yet. Let them come to you. The dinner happened on a Sunday. Peggy cooked. Chicken in a white wine sauce with roasted potatoes, the kind of meal that was genuinely good and that Dorothy knew was genuinely deliberate. You didn't feed someone a bad meal on the night you were planning to deliver difficult news. You made something that put them in a generous mood. Dorothy had been a government administrator for 30 years. She understood the mechanics of managed conversation. She had been ready for this for 2 weeks. She came downstairs in her navy dress and her pearl earrings, and she sat in her chair at her table, and she let Brittany serve her, and she said the food was delicious because it was, and she waited. Peggy poured water into the good glasses. Dorothy's good glasses, the crystal ones from her wedding that she only brought out for Thanksgiving, and set the pitcher down with the easy confidence of a woman in her own home. After 20 minutes of managed pleasantries, Brittany set her fork down. "Dorothy, there's something we've been wanting to talk with you about." "Of course," Dorothy said. She kept her hands in her lap, composed. "Nathan and I have been talking a lot about the future." Brittany glanced at Nathan, who was looking at his plate. "We want to start a family. We want to put down real roots. And we've been thinking, genuinely thinking about what's best for everyone." "That sounds thoughtful," Dorothy said pleasantly. "This house is wonderful. It really is. But it's a lot for one person." Brittany's voice was careful, practiced, warm. "The maintenance alone, the stairs, the yard. We worry about you, Dorothy. We really do. And there are some incredible communities for active adults, they call them now. Not what you might picture. Really lovely places, with activities and neighbors your own age, and everything taken care of so you don't have to—" "You're suggesting I move to a retirement community," Dorothy said. "We just think you'd be happier," Peggy offered smoothly. "More comfortable, surrounded by people at the same stage of life." Dorothy looked at Nathan. He was still looking at his plate. His jaw was tight. He hadn't eaten in several minutes. "Nathan?" she said softly. He looked up. His eyes found hers, and in them she saw what she had heard through the wall. The uncertainty, the conflict, the fundamental decency that was still in there, buried under 6 months of choosing the easier thing. "Is this what you want?" she asked him, quietly, just between them, even with the other two sitting right there. He opened his mouth, closed it. He started. "Mom, I just think it could be good for you to have more support around." "That's not what I asked." Silence. The doorbell rang. Dorothy set her napkin on the table, pushed back her chair, and stood up. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm expecting someone." She walked to the front door with the measured pace of a woman who had been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks and intended to do it properly. James Holloway stood on the porch in his gray suit, briefcase in hand, expression professionally neutral. Behind him, the October evening was doing what Vermont evenings do, turning the sky improbable colors over the lake. "Mrs. Harlan," he said. "James, thank you for coming." She stepped back. "Please come in." She led him to the dining room. The 3 of them, Brittany, Peggy, Nathan, looked up as she entered with a man none of them had ever seen before, and the atmosphere changed in the room the way it changes when a window is opened on a hot day. The temperature dropped several degrees in a second. "I'd like to introduce Mr. James Holloway," Dorothy said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried to every corner of the room. "He is my attorney." Brittany's face went very still. Peggy's water glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Nathan looked at his mother, and Dorothy could see him calculating, trying to understand what he was looking at, what this meant, how far ahead of him she already was. Holloway set his briefcase on the sideboard, opened it, and removed 3 white envelopes. He placed them on the table in front of Brittany, then in front of Peggy, then, with a brief, not unkind pause, in front of Nathan. "Good evening," he said. "My name is James Holloway. I represent Mrs. Dorothy Jean Harlan, sole owner of this property at 412 Elmwood Drive, Burlington, Vermont." "Sole owner," Peggy repeated. Her voice had gone flat. "Sole owner," Holloway confirmed without looking at her. By means of this notice, Mrs. Harlan is formally revoking the permissive occupancy previously extended to Mrs. Brittany Sutton Harlan and Mrs. Peggy Sutton. You have 30 calendar days from today's date to vacate the premises. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Dorothy had sat in before. It had weight. It had texture. Brittany was the first to speak, and her voice, when it came, was no longer the careful, warm, managed instrument it had been for months. It was raw and shaking. You can't do this. This is our home. This property belongs to Mrs. Harlan, Holloway said evenly. You have resided here at her invitation, which has now been withdrawn. Nathan! Brittany turned to her husband and her voice broke on his name. Nathan, say something. This is your mother doing this. She can't just— She can, Holloway said. She absolutely can. Peggy stood up. The chair scraped back hard against the hardwood floor. This is outrageous. My daughter is married to her son. This is their future home. Dorothy told Nathan, Mrs. Harlan has made no legally binding transfer of this property to anyone, Holloway said, his voice still even, still unhurried. The voice of a man who has delivered difficult news before and knows that raising his volume helps nothing. There is no deed, no recorded document, no executed agreement of any kind. Whatever verbal conversations may have occurred, they carry no legal weight. Peggy's mouth opened. For the first time since Dorothy had met her, nothing came out. Furthermore, Holloway continued, reaching into his briefcase again, Mrs. Harlan has in her possession audio recordings of conversations which took place in this home, in which the explicit strategy of, I'm quoting here, making her uncomfortable enough to leave on her own, was discussed, as well as conversations in which conservatorship proceedings were referenced as a potential mechanism for obtaining control of this property. The color left Peggy's face so completely that Dorothy almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Those recordings, Holloway said, will be submitted as evidence in any legal proceeding initiated against Mrs. Harlan. I strongly recommend against such proceedings, but that decision, of course, rests with you. Nathan had not moved. He was sitting in his chair with his hands flat on the table in front of him, looking at the white envelope, and Dorothy watched her son's face with the particular attention of a woman who has been reading that face for 39 years. He was not angry. He was ashamed. Nathan, Brittany said again, her voice urgent, her hand on his arm. Nathan, please. He looked up at Dorothy, and Dorothy looked at her son, really looked at him, the way she had been afraid to look for months because she wasn't sure she could bear what she'd find, and she said very quietly, You knew, Nathan. You've known for a while. The only question now is what you do about it. He closed his eyes. Holloway straightened, clicked his briefcase shut. The notices contain the relevant legal information and a contact number for my office. I'd encourage you to consult your own attorney if you have questions. He turned to Dorothy. Mrs. Harlan, I'll see myself out. Thank you, James. He walked through the dining room, through the entryway and out the front door. His footsteps on the porch, the quiet click of the door behind him. And then there were 4 of them in the dining room, with the good crystal glasses and the half-eaten chicken in white wine sauce and the 3 white envelopes on the table, and the October dark pressing against the windows. Peggy was the first to move. She picked up her envelope and threw it on the floor. This isn't over, she said. We will fight this. We'll tell every court in Vermont that you're an unstable old woman who doesn't know what she's— Peggy. Everyone looked at Nathan. It was the first word he'd said since Holloway arrived. He was still looking at Dorothy. Stop, he said to his mother-in-law, without raising his voice. Just stop. Peggy stared at him. Pick up the envelope, he said quietly. Please. A long, charged moment. Then Peggy bent down and picked up the envelope. She held it against her chest like a wound. And she walked out of the dining room and up the stairs, and the house absorbed the sound of her footsteps overhead. Brittany was crying now. Not the managed, strategic tears that Dorothy had braced for, but something rawer, something that looked like genuine grief or genuine panic, which in the end may be the same thing. How could you do this to us? She whispered. Dorothy considered the question. She considered it seriously, the way she tried to consider all serious questions. I didn't do anything to you, Brittany, she said. I protected what's mine. There's a difference. We're your family. You are Nathan's wife. You are welcome to be my daughter-in-law. Dorothy kept her voice even. You are not welcome to treat my home like something you're waiting for me to vacate. and you are not welcome to discuss having me declared legally incompetent in the house that I own." Brittany flinched. "You heard that," she said. "I live here," Dorothy said simply. Brittany pressed her hand over her mouth. Then she stood, and she walked out of the dining room, and Dorothy heard her going up the stairs, heard the bedroom door close. And then it was just Dorothy and Nathan in the dining room. Her son sat across the table from her, hands still flat on the surface. And the look on his face was not the look of a man who had been ambushed. It was the look of a man who had been waiting, with a sick, hollow feeling in his stomach, for the consequences of choices he'd been making for months. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. "I should have—" "I know, Nathan." He swallowed. "What happens now?" Dorothy looked at her son for a long moment. The boy who had brought her dandelions. The man who had said through a wall, "She's sharper than both of us," and meant it, and still done nothing. "That," she said, "is entirely up to you." She did not sleep much that night. She lay in her bed in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house. The muffled, urgent voices from the room at the end of the hall, Peggy and Brittany talking through their next move. The particular silence from Nathan and Brittany's room that meant Nathan wasn't talking at all. At 2 a.m, she heard the creak of the second floorboard from the top of the stairs. She heard it again, slow, careful, as though someone was trying not to make noise. She heard it stop outside her door, and then, very quietly, a knock. She sat up. "Come in." Nathan opened the door. He was still in his dinner clothes, tie loosened, looking like a man who had been sitting in the dark for hours. "Can I sit down?" She gestured to the chair by the window, Frank's chair, the one she'd kept all these years because she couldn't bear to move it. He sat. He looked at his hands. "I didn't know about the conservatorship thing," he said. "Not until tonight. Not until Holloway said it and I saw Peggy's face. I want you to know I would never have—" "I know, but I knew about the rest of it." He looked up. "I knew what they were doing. I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself you were being stubborn and they were just—" He stopped. "I was a coward." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You were." He nodded as though she had said something he needed to hear out loud. "I'm sorry, Mom." The room was very still. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree Frank had planted, the one that was 40 years old now, and enormous, the one that would outlast all of them. "I forgive you, Nathan," Dorothy said. "I want you to know that, whatever happens next, I forgive you." "Whatever happens next," he repeated. "Whatever you decide." He looked at his hands again. Then he stood up. He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head, the way he hadn't done since he was 12 years old and too old for it, and did it anyway. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, son." He went back to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Mom, that chair." "Yes?" "That was Dad's chair." "It still is," she said. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he left, pulling the door softly shut behind him. Dorothy lay back down. She stared at the ceiling. She breathed. And she waited to find out what kind of man her son was going to be. They were gone by Tuesday, not in 30 days, not after consultations with attorneys or negotiations through Holloway's office. 2 days after the dinner, 2 days after the white envelopes on the table and the look on Peggy Sutton's face when she realized the recordings existed, Brittany and her mother packed their things into the silver Buick and a rented cargo van and left 412 Elmwood Drive on a gray October Tuesday while Dorothy was at watercolor class. She came home to find the house rearranged in the particular way of people who have left in anger. Not vandalized, nothing broken, but things displaced with a carelessness that felt intentional. Cushions off the sofa, cabinet doors left open in the kitchen. The good crystal glasses, which Dorothy had brought out for the dinner, left on the counter unwashed. Nathan was sitting on the porch steps when she pulled into the driveway. He had a duffel bag beside him. Dorothy turned off the engine and sat for a moment, looking at her son on the steps of the house where she had raised him. He looked the way he had looked at 12 after a bad day at school, shoulders forward, hands between his knees, the particular posture of someone who doesn't know where to put all the weight they're carrying. She got out of the car. She walked up the front path. She sat down beside him on the steps. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The maple tree moved in the wind. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it would never catch. "She asked me to go with them," Nathan said. "I know. I didn't. I can see that." He looked at her. Is that okay? That I stayed? Dorothy considered the question the way she considered all questions that mattered. Not quickly, not reflexively, but with the full weight of her attention. That depends, she said, on why you stayed. He was quiet for a moment. A car went past on Elmwood Drive, slowing for the speed bump 2 houses down. Because she's wrong, he said finally. Brittany, about all of it. About you, about the house, about what we were doing. He paused. And because I've been wrong, for a long time. And running away from that by going with her would just be more of the same. Dorothy nodded slowly. Then yes, she said. It's okay that you stayed. She stood up, picked up her watercolor bag, and went inside. After a moment, she heard him pick up his duffel bag and follow. Living with Nathan alone was different from anything that had come before. Not like when he was a boy, when the house had the hum of a child's constant presence, the noise, the needs, the particular chaos of a small person growing up. Not like the months just past, with the crowded, watchful tension of people pretending to be comfortable while quietly preparing for war. This was quieter, more careful. 2 adults moving around each other with the particular delicacy of people who have hurt each other and are trying to figure out how to be in the same room without the hurt filling all the space. Nathan made coffee in the mornings without being asked, using the right amount, the right grind, the way she'd shown him when he was 16. He did the yard work on weekends, raking the leaves from the maple, cutting back the rose bushes along the back fence for winter. He cooked dinner twice a week, simple things, pasta and soup, and the roast chicken recipe she'd taught him years ago. He did not ask about Brittany. Dorothy did not ask either. What they talked about instead, his job, which he was finding harder to care about than he used to. Her watercolor class, where she was attempting a landscape of the lake and it kept coming out looking more like a storm than she intended. The cardinals at the bird feeder. A book she was reading. Whether the furnace needed to be serviced before the real cold came. Small things. Real things. The texture of ordinary life, which is in the end what most of life is made of, and which Dorothy had come to believe was undervalued in the world. Ruth came for dinner on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the Tuesday the others left. She brought wine and a loaf of sourdough from the farmer's market bakery, and she sat at Dorothy's kitchen table with the ease of a person who has sat at that table for 20 years and considers it partly hers by right of long friendship. Nathan was in the living room. Dorothy could hear the television. Something with a lot of applause. A game show, maybe. How is he? Ruth asked, pouring wine into 2 of the regular glasses, the ones that weren't crystal, the ones they used for actual Tuesday evenings rather than strategic dinners. Better, Dorothy said, still figuring himself out, but better. Has he talked to her? Some. I don't ask. Ruth nodded, tearing off a piece of the sourdough. And you? How are you, Dot? Dorothy thought about it. She was sitting in her kitchen, at her kitchen table, in the house that was hers, with her friend of 20 years and her son in the next room. The furnace was running. She'd had it serviced. It was fine. The rose bushes were cut back. The African violets were back on their table in the living room corner. I'm all right, she said, and then, surprised by the truth of it. Actually, I think I'm more than all right. Ruth smiled at her over the rim of her glass. There she is. Don't, Dorothy said, though she was smiling too. I'm just saying I knew you were still in there. I was always in there. I know. I just couldn't always see you. They ate the sourdough and drank the wine, and Ruth stayed until 9:30, which was late for a Thursday. And when she left, Dorothy stood on the porch and watched the taillights of her car disappear around the corner and felt quietly and without drama, grateful. The call from Brittany's attorney came on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the departure. Dorothy was at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and the crossword puzzle from the Burlington Free Press. She did it in pen, had done it in pen for 30 years, considered pencil an act of epistemic cowardice, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Harlan, my name is Robert Carr. I'm an attorney representing Mrs. Brittany Sutton Harlan. Good morning, Mr. Carr. My client has asked me to reach out regarding the vacating notice. She'd like to explore whether there's any room for negotiation, specifically around the timeline and potentially around the disposition of the property going forward. There isn't, Dorothy said. A pause. I see. Mrs. Harlan, I want to make sure you understand that my client has some concerns about the manner in which this situation was handled, and she's considering whether there are grounds for Mr. Carr. Yes? My attorney is James Holloway at Fletcher and Holloway on Cherry Street. If your client has legal concerns, I'd encourage her to raise them with him directly. Dorothy picked up her pen. Is there anything else? Another pause, shorter this time. No, Mrs. Harlan, I think that covers it. Have a good day. She hung up, wrote 19 across. The answer had come to her while she was listening to the attorney, and finished her coffee. She called Holloway's office afterward, gave them the heads up, and Holloway called back within the hour. Nothing to worry about, he said. I spoke with Carr. He knows what they have and what they don't have. I don't expect to hear from him again. Thank you, James. Dorothy, you did this right. I want you to know that. You were patient, you were strategic, and you protected yourself without doing anything you need to regret. She held the phone for a moment after he hung up, sitting in the kitchen with the crossword half finished and the autumn light coming through the window the way it always did at this hour, angled and gold and brief. Frank, she said to no one, to the house, to the light. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. It was Nathan who brought it up first. A Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the others left. He had made pancakes, from scratch, not a box the way Dorothy had taught him. And they were sitting at the kitchen table with the kind of comfortable silence that is not uncomfortable at all, that is in fact its own form of communication between people who know each other well enough not to need to fill every moment with noise. Nathan poured more coffee into his mother's cup without being asked. Mom, he said. That night, when Holloway mentioned the recording, he set the coffee pot down. The one through the wall. Dorothy looked up from her pancakes. I said some things that night, Nathan said carefully. About the house being yours. About not being sure anymore. He paused. You heard that? Yes. He nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he'd already suspected. I want you to know something. I meant it. Every word of it. He stopped, started again. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, it would work itself out. That Brittany would, I don't know, see what she was doing. Stop. And when she didn't, I kept being quiet. He said it flatly without excusing himself. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Not that I didn't see it. That I saw it and did nothing anyway. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Nathan, can I tell you something? Yeah, the night I heard you through the wall. The night you said she was sharper than both of us. That was the night I decided to wait a little longer before calling James. He looked up. Because I heard something in your voice, she said. Something that told me you weren't entirely lost, that you were still you under all of it. And I thought if I was patient enough, you might find your way back. Nathan was very still. Was I right? Dorothy asked. He swallowed. I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. Fair enough, she said. They ate their pancakes. The cardinals were at the feeder. The maple tree, stripped now of most of its leaves, stood in the yard with the patient permanence of something that has weathered many seasons and expects to weather many more. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday. Nathan brought them in from the mailbox and set them on the kitchen counter without a word, then went upstairs. Dorothy saw the envelope, the return address of a law firm in Albany, and left it where it was. That evening she knocked on his bedroom door. Come in. He was sitting in the chair by his window, his childhood room, which he had moved back into without discussion, which still had the same navy blue curtains she'd put up when he was 14. He was holding the envelope, unopened, looking at it the way you look at something you've been expecting that still manages to feel unreal when it arrives. Do you want me to leave you alone? Dorothy asked. No. He looked up. Actually, can we go downstairs? They went to the living room. Nathan sat on the sofa. Dorothy sat in her reading chair. The lamp was on, warm and amber in the early dark of November. The African violets on their table. The portrait of Frank back in its place on the wall above the bookcase, where it had always been before the gold mirror. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, Nathan said. From the beginning, before the wedding, before we moved in. What do you think you could have done? Seen it sooner. He set the envelope on the cushion beside him. She's not a bad person, Mom. I want you to know I don't think that. She grew up watching her mother operate a certain way, taking what you want before someone takes it from you. That was the water she swam in. Dorothy listened. But it doesn't matter, he said. Understanding why someone does something doesn't make it okay. And I let it go on because understanding felt like the same thing as excusing. He shook his head. It isn't. No, Dorothy said. It isn't. They sat in the warm lamplight for a moment. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Were you ever going to tell me that the house was still in your name? Dorothy considered the question seriously. I don't know, she said honestly. Before all this, I think I would have eventually. When the time felt right. She paused. The time stopped feeling right somewhere around the time the photograph of your father disappeared from the entryway. Nathan looked at Frank's portrait on the wall. The same photograph. Frank at the cabin, laughing, squinting into summer light. I didn't notice, he said quietly. When she moved it, I didn't even notice. I know. He stopped. That's the part that gets me, Mom. Not the big things. The fact that I just didn't notice. Dorothy looked at her son for a long moment. Then she stood up, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the sofa. She hadn't sat beside him on a sofa since he was small. Since the years when he would press himself against her side to watch a movie, and she would put her arm around him, and they would sit like that for hours, perfectly content. She didn't put her arm around him now. He was 39 years old, and she wasn't going to treat him like a child. But she sat beside him, close, and she said, You notice now. He nodded. That's what counts, Nathan. Not that you never made a mistake, that you're capable of seeing it. He turned the envelope over in his hands, once, twice. What happens now? He asked. With the house, I mean. With us. Dorothy thought about James Holloway's office and the lockbox on the top shelf of her closet, and the document inside it that still read only her name. You stay as long as you need to, she said. While you figure things out. There's no timeline. And after? Long term? Long term, she said. We'll figure out when we get there. She paused. But Nathan, it will be a conversation. A real one. Not a promise made once at dinner. Not an assumption you build a plan on. A conversation, with papers, with James present, when the time is actually right. And you'll know when the time is right? I'll know, she said simply. He almost smiled. Yeah, you will. He opened the envelope then, read the first page, the second, folded it back up and set it on the coffee table. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded and looked at the middle distance for a while. Then he looked at Frank's portrait on the wall. Dad would have handled this better than me, he said. Your father, Dorothy said carefully, once spent 3 months avoiding a difficult conversation with his own mother because he didn't want to upset anyone. And then he spent years feeling guilty about it. Nathan looked at her. Really? He was human, Nathan. The same as you. Did he figure it out? Eventually? Eventually, Dorothy said. He always did. He just needed time to get there. They sat in the lamplight a little longer. November dark pressed against the windows. The furnace hummed. The house held them, as it had always held whoever needed holding. Winter came early that year, the way it does in Vermont. Not gradually, but decisively, overnight, as though the season had simply made up its mind. Dorothy woke one morning in late November to find the yard transformed. 6 inches of snow blanketing the rose bushes and the lawn and the roof of the garage where Nathan's car had been since September. She stood at the bedroom window with her coffee and looked at it. The white yard, the bare maple, the bird feeder with snow piled on top of it like a small hat, and felt something she had been slowly, carefully feeling her way toward for weeks. Ready. She called James Holloway after breakfast. James, I'd like to come in. When do you have time? Tomorrow morning, Dorothy. 9 o'clock. Perfect. She did not tell Nathan. Not yet. She wanted to think it through on her own first. One more time, with no one else in the room. She went to the fireproof lockbox and took out the deed and read it again. Dorothy Jean Harlan. Sole owner. She read the date it was recorded. She thought about everything that had happened since that date. Every year of it, every mortgage payment, every school year, every season of that maple tree. She thought about Frank, who had been the most honest person she had ever known, and who had always said that the right time to do the right thing was simply whenever you were finally ready. She was ready. The next morning she sat across from Holloway in his office with the lake visible through the tall windows, silver under the November clouds. I want to update my estate plan, she said. Comprehensively. All right. Walk me through what you're thinking. The house goes to Nathan. That was always the intention, and it remains the intention. She paused. But not as an inheritance. Not when I die. Holloway tilted his head slightly. A transfer during your lifetime? A partial transfer. I want to explore a life estate arrangement. She had looked it up, 3 nights running, reading legal explanations until she understood them. I retain full rights to live in the property and make decisions about it for the rest of my life. The remainder interest transfers to Nathan upon my death. He cannot sell it, mortgage it, or alter it without my consent while I'm alive. Holloway was nodding slowly. That's a well-established structure. It gives Nathan the security of knowing his future interest is legally documented while preserving your complete authority over the property during your lifetime. Exactly. And if Nathan remarries, if there's a new spouse, the life estate is mine regardless of his marital status. Whatever he does with his personal life, that's his business. But this house, while I am alive, is mine, completely. Dorothy! Holloway set his pen down and looked at her over his glasses. This is very well thought out. I've had time, she said dryly. When do you want to tell Nathan? Tonight. I'd like to bring him in to meet with you this week so he hears it from both of us. So it's real, documented, not a dinner table promise. Holloway smiled. Not his professional smile, but the other one, the smaller one that meant he was genuinely pleased. I'll have the preliminary documents drafted by Thursday. She told Nathan that evening after dinner. He had made soup, vegetable beef, from a recipe of Dorothy's mother's that had been in the family for 40 years, and they were sitting at the kitchen table with the snow coming down again outside, and the kitchen warm and smelling of bay leaves and thyme. She told him about the life estate, what it meant, what it guaranteed for both of them. He listened without interrupting, the way he had been learning over these past weeks to listen. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. So it's still your house, he said. For as long as I'm alive, yes. And then it's mine. And then it's yours. He looked at the table, at his soup, at the window where the snow was building up on the sill. Mom, you didn't have to do this. After everything that happened, you didn't owe me anything. I know that. Then why? Dorothy set her spoon down. She had thought about how to answer this question, anticipated it, and still found that the answer was simpler than she'd expected. Because this house, she said, was built by both of us, Nathan. Not equally. I put in more years and more work, and I know that. But you grew up here. Your childhood is in these walls. Your father is in this house in ways that matter. She paused. And because I trust you now in a way I couldn't 3 months ago. Not because you're perfect. Because you showed me who you are when things got hard. He looked up. You stayed, she said simply. When leaving would have been easier, you stayed. He pressed his lips together, nodded once. Thank you, Mom. Thank James. He's doing the paperwork. Nathan almost laughed. Okay, thank James. Come in Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Thursday morning they sat side by side across from Holloway's desk, mother and son, and they went through the documents together. Every clause, every condition, every right and responsibility spelled out in plain language with no room for misunderstanding. Dorothy signed first, then Nathan. Holloway signed as witness. His assistant notarized. When it was done, the documents went into a folder, and a copy went into Dorothy's fireproof lockbox that afternoon, next to the original deed. Dorothy Jean Harlan, life tenant. Nathan Frank Harlan, remainder beneficiary. Both names, for the first time, as it should be. Winter settled over Burlington like a long, necessary exhale. December came with its short days and its particular early dark, and Dorothy found that she did not mind. She had always secretly preferred winter, the way it made the house feel more like a house. The furnace running, the lamps on early, the smell of something cooking filling every room. Nathan found an apartment in February, a 1-bedroom on North Winooski Avenue, 12 minutes away. He had a good job offer, a new project, something to rebuild around. He came for dinner on Sundays. He brought dessert, something from the bakery on Church Street, always something different, as though he were working his way through the entire menu 1 week at a time. Dorothy called her sister Carol every Sunday morning, same as always. She told her everything, the whole story, from the beginning, with all its complications and its small shames and its moments of grace. Carol listened all the way through without interrupting, which was remarkable for Carol, and then said, "Dot, you are the most quietly ferocious person I have ever known." Dorothy had laughed at that. She was still smiling about it 3 days later. Ruth came for their Tuesday yoga in February, and they walked out afterward into a bright, cold afternoon, the snow hard-packed on the sidewalks, the sky the particular shade of blue that only happens in Vermont in February, so sharp and so clear it almost hurts to look at it. "How are you?" Ruth asked. She asked it the way she always asked, not as a pleasantry, but as a genuine question requiring a genuine answer. Dorothy thought about it as they walked. She thought about the house on Elmwood Drive, the deed in the lockbox, the rose bushes under the snow that would come back in May, the way they always came back. She thought about Nathan at his apartment on North Winooski, 12 minutes away. She thought about the watercolor landscape she was working on, the one of the lake, which was finally, after many attempts, starting to look like something she was actually happy with. She thought about Frank's portrait on the wall above the bookcase, back in its right place, looking out at the room that still held 32 years of his life, even though he had been gone from it for 20. "I'm good," she said. Ruth glanced at her sideways. "Really?" "Really." She paused. "Not happy every minute. Not without—" "It costs something, Ruth." "What happened?" "The part with Nathan especially. That doesn't just stop hurting." "No," Ruth agreed. "It doesn't. But I'm in my house. My name is on the deed. My son comes for dinner on Sundays." Dorothy stopped walking for a moment because she wanted to say the next thing properly. "And when I wake up in the morning, I know exactly whose life I'm living. Mine." Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she linked her arm through Dorothy's, the way she had been doing since they were both young women pushing strollers down Church Street, and they kept walking. The cold air was clean and bright. The maple tree on Elmwood Drive would start to bud in April. The deed in the lockbox still said Dorothy Jean Harlan, and it would say so for a long time yet, for as many mornings as she had left. And there would be many, she was sure of it, because she was 71 years old and her mind was perfectly clear, and she had a watercolor to finish, and a sister to call on Sunday, and a friend walking beside her who had never once let her down. She was the owner of her house. She was the owner of her life. That was everything. "You know what Frank would say?" Ruth said after a while. "What?" "He'd say you always were the smart one." Dorothy considered this. "He would not," she said. "He'd say he told me so about the lockbox in 1994, and he was right and he wanted credit." Ruth burst out laughing, the full, unguarded laugh of a woman who has been laughing with the same person for 20 years and still finds her funny. Dorothy laughed too. Their voices rose up into the bright February air and disappeared, the way all the best things do. Not lost exactly, but released, sent out into the world, still warm.